I was 15 years old the first time I tried to kill myself. It was your typical teenage angst story. I was bullied, made to feel like I didn't belong, and finally I decided that I really didn't. I went home that night and hung myself using a belt and the stair banister. Luckily, I was also a stupid kid and was pretty noisy about the whole affair. My father found me and cut the belt before I ran out of oxygen. The second time I tried to do it, I was 22. In the middle of my junior year of college and losing my shit daily due to stress and anxiety. I finally cracked under the pressure, and this time I decided I would try the pill route. After all, in my mind, it was unfinished business. I took about triple the normal dose of my anxiety medication and washed it down with a bit of whiskey. My roommate found me an hour later, unresponsive. He called the EMS and started performing CPR right away, doing chest compressions in an attempt to get my heart beating again. He was about to give up when the ambulance arrived. A moment after he stopped compressions, my heart suddenly started beating again. This was followed by me bolting upright and vomiting in his lap. Not the best way to thank someone for saving your life, I suppose. My third attempt fizzled out pretty quickly. I decided that I wanted something quick, relatively painless, and something that I couldn't easily be brought back from this time. So, I grabbed the nice toaster that my aunt had gotten me when I moved into my apartment and took a bath. I was 25 years old and, again, still not smart enough to research things or plan accordingly. I dropped the toaster in a full bathtub and it immediately shorted the breaker, leaving me sitting in an almost overflowing bath with a ruined toaster and more feelings of failure. Ready for the irony now? The first time I actually died, it wasn't by my hand. I was crossing the street downtown, trying to get back to my car after working a much longer shift than I should have, and got hit by a fucking semi-truck. This was about 8 months ago, and I was legally dead for 4 minutes. The thing is, it felt like years. Dying isn't how you hear it described in those inspirational stories. Not any that I heard anyway. There was no tunnel, no light, no pearly gates. There was no indication of hell either, with fire and brimstone falling everywhere. No, the next thing I saw after getting hit by that truck was the crossroads I woke up at. It was a 4-way intersection in the middle of a dilapidated town. Stoplights were hanging from each side, blinking yellow, and a thick fog filled the entire area. I could only see maybe 100 feet in either direction. It took a few minutes to get my bearings and remember what happened. By the time I did, I could hear footsteps pounding my way, growing louder by the second. I turned to look up, just in time to have a man that looked a little younger than myself smack right into me, knocking us both off of our feet and to the hard pavement below. Shit, 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 where did you come from? He was shouting. Panic was then rising in his voice. He scrambled back to his feet and started running again, going in the same direction. He stopped briefly and turned back, giving me a solemn look. I would get going if I were you. They're on their way, he said. Who? I asked, still picking myself up off the ground. But he didn't stick around to answer my question. It just disappeared into the fog only seconds later. I decided to just assume I was dreaming. There wasn't much to prove I wasn't, after all. I was hit by that truck, probably knocked out, and now I'm just stuck in this weird dream. Maybe even in a coma somewhere. Just have to wait around here until I wake up, I thought. The footsteps approached again, though, pounding against the pavement in the same panicked rhythm as last time. They were running from something. He appeared from the fog yet again, coming to a complete stop right beside me this time and letting out a tirade of curses. Wrong way, you're going the wrong fucking way, he shouted, and he was looking in every direction, trying to size up where to go next. Which direction did I run last time? He yelled at me angrily. I think it was that one. I pointed to my left, the yellow light illuminating my outstretched arm in the fog. I noticed I was wearing the same jeans and hoodie that I had changed into before leaving work, except now there were tears in the fabric and dark smudges all over. My skin underneath the tears was scraped and burned as well, as if I had been dragged across the asphalt or something. The man tossed a rock over at the direction I pointed, landing it squarely in the center of the road. He turned back to me and shook his head, "I told you to run," he said again. "You don't want to get caught." He was cut off by something lifting him in the air just then. As I looked, I saw a tendril poking from the center of his chest, holding him above the ground. He coughed up blood. The tendril then began to grow, enveloping him as it did. "Run, you dumbass. Avoid anywhere you see one of those rocks," he yelled. He was snatched backward into the fog, his scream the only thing left. I didn't ignore his warning this time. Even if this was a dream, I wasn't sticking around to see what this thing would do to me. I started running in the opposite direction he had come from, taking twists and turns every time a new intersection came up. I could feel something, multiple somethings, watching me from the rooftops and alleys of the buildings. There were these things out there, hunting. Maybe some of them were hiding. I ran for what seemed like an eternity, not stopping until I hit a three-way street with a giant building along one side. Hazelton Elementary School, it read. I didn't care what it was, the door was open and I could see a little light inside. I ran in and slammed the door behind me. The hallway I entered into was dingy and dark, lights flickering like a cheap horror movie. Posters of events and art done by students lined the halls. PSAs about washing hands, saying no to drugs, and other typical campaigns were everywhere. It looked like a typical elementary school. Something was off though, something I couldn't place for the life of me. I could hear children laughing down the hall. If there were kids here, then there had to be teachers. Maybe a teacher could point me to somewhere safe. My footsteps echoed in the empty hallway, making a terrifying song when mixed with the laughter. The door just ahead was open and the voices pouring forth from it. I stepped into a classroom full of children, all suddenly silent at their desks, facing the other side of the room where a blank chalkboard hung on the wall. Excuse me, I uttered. They all turned as one, looking directly at me. They had no eyes, just hollow pits, pure darkness, and they began screaming at me, as one high-pitched shriek that seemed to be layered in multiple octaves, many not humanly possible, I thought. It was at that point that I ran again. My screams mixed with theirs as I went, fleeing from the hallways, trying to find any way out that I could. Finally, there came a broom closet on my left. I dove in, slamming the door behind me. I scrambled for a lock and put anything heavy I could find in front of the door, then settled back into a corner, hugging my knees close to my chest and choking back tears. There was a clock up on the wall, but it was either broken or being affected by whatever this place was, as all three hands were moving around the clock, varying speed as they went. I don't know how long I sat there for, watching the hands spin and listening intently for whatever could be out there. I'm also not sure when I fell asleep, but that's when I knew that what was happening wasn't just a dream. This was really happening. I fell into a darkness sleep, sitting in the corner of a broom closet in some crazy afterlife, waiting to be devoured by monsters that lurked in the fog. Sometime later, I woke up in a daze, not knowing how long I had been there. I jumped to my feet in surprise, remembering the eyeless children and terrifying sounds from before, but hit my head on a shelf that I hadn't realized was above me. Crap, I shouted before I realized what I was doing. The door began to rattle immediately, something pounding against the other side. Whatever it was didn't sound friendly, as there was a high-pitched screeching coming from the hallway, just like the children had made. I brought my hand up to my mouth, trying to muffle my terror. The noises continued for a few minutes before stopping abruptly. I could hear footsteps moving away from the door, almost skipping, like a small child or something. After a few minutes of silence, I decided to peek out. I knew I couldn't stay there for forever and decided to take a quick look and make a break for the exit as soon as possible. I turned the handle slowly a bit, trying not to make any noise. The door made a high squeal as it opened, and I turned to look out into the hall. Nothing to my left, and to my right the lights were flickering and something ran by at the end, a shadow or something small it looked like. I ran into the empty direction as fast as I could, sprinting at full speed, trying not to scream as I went. But I could hear something behind me, and I was too afraid to look lest I see one of those eyeless children or something even worse. Finally, there was a huge double door just ahead with a push bar to open it. Not slowing down, I lowered my shoulder a bit and hit it head on, busting through and falling on my face to the concrete outside. My elbows were scraped and I hit my nose, causing blood to pour out, but I scrambled to my feet and kept going, turning down the nearest street towards another blinking stoplight. Screams then followed me down the street, rising from nearby buildings and alleyways. They were signaling, telling whatever other monsters there were that there was fresh meat on the run. This was their dinner bell, and I knew I was the main course. A garage door rolled up a couple feet on a building to my left. Slowing down slightly, I could see a face poking out from underneath, looking both ways down the street. They saw me and motioned for me to get over there quickly. "Get in here quick," a voice said. I didn't need to be told twice. I dove in, rolling under the small space that was opened. The door fell shut behind me, and I just laid there for a moment, trying to find my senses and catch my breath. The person that had opened it for me sat down by the opposite wall, and she stared at me for a moment, sizing me up. "So, you must have just arrived then," she said after a few minutes. "Guess you've seen some of the local residents." "Where am I said, and that was the only question I could muster up. I was still near hyperventilating, trying to keep my wits about me. So much had happened in the past few hours that I didn't even know what to ask. "I can't help you there," she said. "Only thing I know is this place is constantly changing. The only thing consistent is the fog. Otherwise, I've seen this place as a town, a forest, even an industrial park. It's constantly shifting with no rhyme or reason as to when or what." She looked around again, with a dim light bulb overhead casting shadows over her face. Her eyes looked even more sunken than they actually were. "Okay, alright, well, what the hell are these things out there then?" I asked. "Well, not much help there either. Monster is the best answer I have for that. Which ones have you run into?" she said. I went on to tell her about the man I ran into when I first got here, how he was taken by a tendril, and she simply nodded. Then the story about the classroom full of eyeless children. She gave a shudder at that. Yeah, we don't go near the school if we can help it. Monsters are bad enough, but when they look like that, it's so much worse," she said. Well, I asked. How many of you are there then?" I said. "Who knows now?" She stared up at the light again, lost in thought. "Sounds like we lost someone to that tendril, from what you're saying. There's usually about 5 or so people here at any given time from what I've seen. You either get devoured or you get turned, or you find the way out," she said. "Okay, wait a second. So there is a way out then. Where? Where is the way out?" I asked. "You think I would be sitting here with you if I actually knew?" she scoffed, giving me a condescending look. "They say there's a way out somewhere around here. If you find it, it'll let you live again. If not, then you have to stay here, either until these things take you or you hit your limit and become one yourself." She sighed and leaned her head back against the wall, looking defeated. I felt bad for her. She had obviously been here a long time, and God knows the things that she had seen here. The poor woman looked exhausted, like she just wanted to lay down and die. I got to my feet and offered her a hand. "So, apparently we need to find a way out of here then," I said, waiting for her to grab my hand. She was simply studying me, trying to figure out if she could trust me or not. "Look, we don't have any other better options, do we?" I said. She sighed and grabbed my hand, rising to her feet and brushing dust off from her clothes. "I guess not," she said. "Just be careful. If it comes down to it, I won't hesitate to leave your ass behind," she exclaimed. "Oh, okay. Alright, well, you must have been real popular in the real world, huh?" I gave her a grin. This was still a total mess, and God knows if we would make it out of this and back to life, but at least I wasn't alone anymore. It only took dying to get here. "Is there anything we can do about these things? You said we would become one of them if we're here too long," I asked. "Yeah, that's right. Well, at least your memory isn't dying, right?" she said. "From what I gathered, this is where we go. No heaven, no hell, just this. An endless game of death and being hunted. Hell, we don't know if the gate is real or if it really sends you back to the living world or not. We just have to hope for it," she said. "Okay, well, we're not going to find it waiting around here," I said. "Let's get moving." I started poking around the garage, trying to find anything that could be used as a weapon. I doubt I could do anything to the monsters out there, but I was at least going to try to arm myself. I started to laugh when the realization hit me. "What's so funny?" she asked. "I've spent half of my life wishing I was dead trying to achieve that goal, and now I'm fighting to be alive. Kind of funny if you think about it," I said. We left the garage after an hour, taking the time to plan and prepare for whatever may be out there. Turns out her name was Chloe, and by her count she had been here for at least 3 weeks. She wouldn't say much about what she had seen or how she got here though, and it seemed to bring up painful memories when I asked. Chloe rolled up the garage door and I slid under to check both sides of the street. Everything looked clear at the moment, so I motioned for her to follow. We crept out and started heading to the left, working in the same way I was before finding her. The fog hadn't lessened and it seemed darker than it was before. So, you said people can turn into these things? I whispered as we walked, keeping an eye on any side alleyways and the windows above. Well, I haven't seen it myself, she said. Only heard about it secondhand from others. They said after so long in here, people just begin to morph. They grow other limbs and twist in ways no human should. Lots of stuff, she said. We both shuddered thinking of it, how it could happen to us. We walked in silence for a while after that, listening for any movement in the stillness of the fog. There was a scream some distance away, probably 2 blocks or so to our left, and it was cut off quickly. You think, she started to ask, and I just nodded in response. Someone else just met their end. There was movement ahead, subtle, almost unnoticeable except for a small scraping sound that it left behind. There was something dragging itself across the pavement, just a ways in front of us, something big. The streetlights on either side began to flicker, causing my perception to falter. I couldn't tell if the shadow of whatever it was coming back closer or moving away. The lights finally went out completely, leaving us in an ethereal darkness. Oh shit, I heard Chloe whisper. I looked over and could make out her silhouette holding the crowbar she had found, prepared to strike if need be. Be ready to run, I said. She grunted in acknowledgement. Whatever it was had stopped moving. The shadow was still ahead, almost like a statue. Despite being able to make out Chloe's silhouette, this just looked like a large blob, an ink blot on the foggy background, towering at least 8 feet tall. Think we can sneak past? I posed the question. Probably not, she replied. Not that we have much of a choice, though. We moved to one side of the street, pressing ourselves against the brick wall of a storefront, trying to move as quickly and silently as possible. We shimmied along the edge, making our way past the blob while not taking an eye off of it. We had made it a couple of feet past when I tripped on a gutter coming off the building. Thunk. I hit the ground hard, landing on my knee. Pain shot up my leg. I bit my lip to try and stifle any noise before it could come out, but blood began to bead around my teeth. Run, Chloe whispered. I looked back to see the blob unfurling through the gloom, appendages rising out of it in every possible side and angle, all ending in hands with jagged broken fingers. I still couldn't see the whole thing clearly, just the shadow. It then let out a high-pitched screech, almost like a dog whistle before thundering towards us. Adrenaline shot through my veins. I quickly went from the kneeling position on my hurt knee to a full-on sprint, with Chloe right beside me. Despite its size, the blob was right behind us, keeping on at an ever-closing distance. Next crossing, turn left, Chloe said, breathless. It shouldn't be able to make sharp turns. When we hit the next intersection, we both took the left around the corner, staying to the wall as tight as we could. Chloe was right. It went cascading past, hitting a building on the opposite side of the street and busting through its window with a loud crash. We were just trying to get some distance, but now we just raised the dinner bell instead. The now familiar screams of the damned rose all around us as they came charging from any hiding place possible. There was too much noise being made now. Oh, God damn it, Chloe said. There was a group of creatures slithering towards us from an alleyway, snake-like bodies with human heads and faces. From ahead of us there was something lumbering in our direction, more than double my height, with arms and legs like small trees. This was bad. We were surrounded by ever more horrifying creatures, and the fog was closing in along with these monsters. Chloe and I huddled together, backs to the wall, waiting for our inevitable death after death. One of the snake creatures sprung forward. Chloe tried to swipe it away with her weapon, but didn't hit it in time. Her crowbar made a sickly crunch in the monster as it hit the side, but it had already sunken its teeth into her leg. She cried out in pain as I reached down, attempting to pry it off. I wanted to get out of here, she said. Didn't want to give that bastard the satisfaction. Her voice trailed off again as she looked down at the monster. Finally, I managed to pry its jaws open and pull it off her leg, holding it right behind the head so it couldn't bite me as well. As we were looking down at it, I suddenly felt lightheaded and got the feeling in my stomach like I was dropping through space. Chloe looked like she was having the same feeling, though that could have been just the pain from the bite. Then the feeling finally faded. I grabbed the snake monster by the head and twisted it as far as I could. It let out a snap and a small squeal, life fading from its eyes. I threw it away into the street. What the hell? I said, looking around me. The street and surrounding storefronts were gone. In their place were closely growing trees, almost cutting off the fog due to how thickly grouped they were. Wow, I've never had that change happen while I'm out in the open, Chloe whispered through grit teeth. It's always while I'm holed up somewhere. Okay, so then where do we go now? I asked. I had only experienced the town. This was even more out of my wheelhouse than that was, and I was lost as it is. She simply looked around and then started limping towards the nearest thicket of trees. She stopped by one and looked up. The trees grew tall, fog obscuring everything past the first layer of branches that started about 20 feet up. She seemed to be sizing up the tree, inspecting it. Think you can climb? She asked. Well, it's not like the fog is any less up there, so we're just still as blind, I told her. She grimaced at that. It would be great to get a vantage point to see our surroundings, but I doubt we would actually be able to see any more than we can now. If anything, it could risk more injury, I thought. We set off through the fog, knocking a mark into every other tree we passed with a crowbar, so we could make sure we weren't walking in circles. Eventually we came to a clearing with a small shack, the door closed and windows shuttered. We cautiously pushed the door open, checking inside. A knife flashed by my head, sticking halfway into the door behind me, and I heard a voice from the corner. Get out, a low growl, vaguely male. The voice sounded muffled though. I squinted to see in the dim light a man standing in the corner, hood drawn up over his head. He moved towards us, continuing to speak. Not supposed to be here, need to leave. You all need to get out. I'm not going to be damned with them, he said. As he stepped forward, I could see why he sounded this way. Chloe gasped behind me. His mouth was halfway sealed shut by his own flesh, and his right arm seemed normal, but his left was grotesquely fused together, forming into a talon. You mean it's not an instant thing? I asked incredulously. The hideous man in front of us should be dead, well, more dead than he already was. His breathing was labored, no surprise due to the skin blocking off half his face. God knows what could be happening to his insides with how he looked on the outside. He pointed at us then with one of his talons. You both need to leave. This is my shack and I'll die here. They're not going to take me. He was raving mad, words obscured. Not going to take old Mickey. No, they won't, he said. Well, hold on a second. We're not like them, I said. Please, just talk to us, Chloe then said, moving toward him with her hands up in front of her. Chloe, don't get too close, I shouted, trying to pull her away from the half-man, half-monster that she was moving towards. I didn't trust this guy, no matter if he was turned or not. He could attack us at any second. No, he could help save us, she said. I never heard anything about someone turning and still keeping their sense of self. Maybe he knows something. Maybe he knows where the way out is. Her voice rose with excitement as she spoke, still edging towards him. Please, Mickey, right? That's your name? I'm Chloe, and we're not here to hurt you. Maybe we can help you. How long have you been like this? He still had the talon raised towards her, but lowered it ever so slightly as she spoke. His eyes seemed to water a bit then, giving away a vulnerability. You look like her. Where is she? He said, and he started looking around frantically, calling out for a woman's name. She was right there with me. Oh God, Ashley, I hope you're okay. If I find that bastard. His voice then trailed off. What happened to you, Mickey? Chloe asked, moving nearer as he lowered his arm. His tears were flowing freely now, running down the overgrown skin on his mouth, and he let out a muffled sob. We were at a festival. I heard gunshots. I put her behind me, and the next thing I know, I'm here, he replied quietly. What festival? I asked him. My hometown, he said. It was a local beer and burger festival we have every year, he explained, looking shell-shocked. It suddenly hit me that I knew what he was talking about. Wait, was it Carsonville? I said, and he nodded. No way, that was 6 months ago. That was 6 months ago, so even if you didn't find the exit, it wouldn't do any good, would it? You'd still be dead. Stop it, Chloe hissed at me. I could see Mickey getting a glazed over look. My head was spinning. There was no way this could all be really happening. He's been surviving in here for 6 months, running from monsters and evil and God knows what else. If he got out, who's to say he wouldn't come back as one of them? I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Mickey, I said softly, looking at him. I needed to put on a face now. I wanted so badly to be brave during all this, but I couldn't. If Mickey could face this hell for 6 months, then I need to stay calm for 10 minutes to help him. Look, Mickey, maybe we can all get out of here together. Time probably doesn't work the same way. Have you heard anything about a way out? I said. He studied me for a few moments, then scratched his head with a talon. A muffled sigh escaped him. I heard a little bit here and there, he said, something about a building that leads to nothing. Says it's in the deep middle of town though. Where we at now? He asked. The forest, Chloe replied. It just changed a few hours ago. Well, the factory should be next then. Be easier to find our way out of town from here, he said. Chloe gave him a look like she didn't know what he meant. He shrugged at her. This place don't work like normal. I've wandered into the town from the forest before, made my way into the factory from the town. Seems like the land moves when it wants, but most everything stays in position relative to each other, he said. Great, because this shit isn't already insane enough, I said. So what do we do then? Wait here until it changes again? I asked. But we didn't get a chance to decide. Something had heard our exchange in the shack. There was a pounding on one of the walls as something screamed outside. The frame shook and threatened to fall in, and something was on the roof now. Time to leave, Chloe said, hefting her pipe and inching towards the door. The room continued to rattle as something stopped around above us, trying to find a weak spot in the boards. Chloe then signaled to us both and we followed her. She gave a countdown, threw open the door, and ran full sprint, and we both followed after her. We had only made it a few feet, not even into the tree line, when something then grabbed her. It was large, at least 15 feet tall. Sinewed muscles ripped across the length of its body as leathery wings unfurled. It grabbed her with two powerful arms and then burst back into the air, leaving huge gashes in the ground. I hardly had a chance to shout before another, just like it, did the same to me. The last thing I felt before losing consciousness was the strong arms binding me to it and it looking back at me with dark black eyes before it headbutted me. I woke up sometime later sprawled out on cold concrete. To my left I could see Chloe, to my right was an open street. Mickey was standing there, surrounded by a horde of other creatures that were already fully turned. He looked back at me, one eye completely black while the other was still an emerald green. He would have looked slack-jawed if not for the skin growing over his mouth. He looked back at the monsters waiting and let out a screech. Mickey, you're still human. Come on, man, I said. I moved back towards Chloe and tried shaking her awake. She stirred slightly as Mickey screeched again. He began to move towards us and finally grabbed Chloe, slicing her open as he did so. He dragged her back to the monsters. Chloe, no, I yelled. I started to get up and stumbled towards them, but tripped and fell. A creature on all fours then leapt towards me, landing on my back and digging claws in. I screamed in pain. Chloe finally woke up, looking around her and beginning to scream in terror. But then Mickey threw her forward into the crowd of monsters. They continued to watch as she scrambled up, blood flowing from her shoulder and staining the pavement. Mickey, no, I said. You've lasted so long. Please don't do this. Chloe then started begging him as well. He looked towards the other creatures, lifting his talon towards Chloe. This was it. This must be the final measure. The transformation would be complete once he killed her, and the monster would take over forever. Just then, he sliced the talon forward, his inhuman screech turning into a scream as his own chest was ripped open. The monsters then gathered around and began to screech and writhe, becoming a wrathful mass. Mickey screamed and dug the talon in further. As he did, I noticed the area he was standing in begin to get very dark. The air seemed to ripple and break, becoming a static mass. Chloe caught my eye and then nodded to me at that moment. I flipped over quickly while the creature on my back was distracted. It fell to the ground with a thump and looked dazed. Chloe and I then both ran toward the break in space, and Chloe tried to grab Mickey on the way, but he pushed her off of him, making her fall back into the void. She disappeared into thin air. I can't go, he grunted through the pain. His blood was pouring to the pavement, a deep red instead of the normal scarlet. He dug in deeper. Ashley Foreman, please make sure she made it, he said. I nodded at him. The monster that had been on my back was leaping towards us, and Mickey pushed me out of the way at the last second, taking the full force of the hit. I saw the light fade from his remaining human eye as he hit the ground. The rest of the group then fell forward onto him, ripping and tearing. Then everything went dark. Chloe was in front of me, staring at a distant point of light in the darkness, and she turned to look at me as I stood. Guess this is it, she sighed. Thank you. I don't think I could have made it without your help, she said. You kidding me? I replied. I would have been eaten alive way back there without you. I owe you more than my life, I said. If you're ever in France, give me a shout. Chloe Goddard. It'd be nice to get to know you once we're out of here. Deal, I said. She held her hand out and I took it and we walked forward, stepping into the distant light. We have a pulse, was the first thing I heard after stepping through. I opened my eyes to see a paramedic standing over me. The next few days were a bit of a blur. From what I was told by the doctors, I was dead for 4 minutes. It felt like days to me. I ended up staying in the hospital for a few weeks while I recovered, but made it out with a broken leg, lacerated liver, and some cracked ribs. I looked up Ashley when I got out as well. She was at the festival in Carsonville when a shooter started firing into the crowd. Her brother, Mickey, jumped in front of her and took the bullet, saving her life. I sent a letter a couple of weeks ago telling her how I had died and met him, letting her know that he loved her and wants the best for her. I left out the horrifying details for her sake, but let her know how good of a man he was. I then looked up Chloe online, and turns out she had been in a coma for the past 2 weeks after suffering multiple injuries from an abusive ex-boyfriend. She had a brief flatline a couple of days in, but came back from it. I got on a flight and went to visit her when she woke up. She gave me a smile, and we just sat there together for a while, feeling a nice calm after our shared ordeal. Communication wasn't so easy though, and it turns out the whole time there she had been speaking French while I was speaking English. Just another weird bit to chalk up to the afterlife, I suppose. We started to converse slowly, learning each other's respective languages, and we got along even better here than we did there. I don't know what caused that door to open, whether it was Mickey sacrificed or just right place, right time. Either way, I hope I'm wrong about that being our only afterlife. Hopefully, that's just the place you go before it's truly your time, when your fate is still undecided. Hopefully, when you reach your natural end, you gain the paradise that everyone speaks of. I guess I'll never know.